I'm Ken Crowdy with the Utah Division of Emergency Management, and it's my pleasure to introduce our workshop presenter for this session of our Be Ready Utah webinar, Water Treatment and Storage by the infamous Bryan Stinson. Bryan is currently a community outreach specialist with the Utah Division of Emergency Management and the Be Ready Utah section. Years ago, Bryan enrolled in a CERT, that's a Community Emergency Response Team program. It was a course in his neighborhood, and he fell in love with helping people be more prepared for emergencies. He worked for 9 years with an emergency preparedness retail store called Survivor Solutions. And he
Survival
also,
Solutions.
oh, I'm sorry,
That's my. That's
Survival.
okay. It's my mom's. It's my mom's store, so she probably wants you to say it right.
Got it right. And he also earned a master's degree in leadership with an emphasis in disaster preparedness. When it comes to practical knowledge and a guy who walks the talk and is willing to share that knowledge with others, no one surpasses Bryan Stinson. Take it away, Bryan.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate everybody being here. I realize this is the last one after our eighth hour after 7 hours already. So I appreciate everybody that's hanging in here with us. We're gonna do this really good, but water is so very important. Before we get going with water storage, I wanted to share one thing, and kind of just wrapping up our 8 hour webinar. After 9/11, FEMA did a study to see how much more prepared Americans are since that time. And it was about 10 or so years after the fact that they did a study and found out that over that 10-year period of time, the percentage of the American population that was more prepared for emergencies increased by a whopping 0%. And the reason for that is because, this is after starting things like ready.gov, Be Ready Utah, and a lot of states coming up with similar kinds of programs. And they found out that way more effective than just experts telling you what they know. That's great, but we talk about the water needing to get to the end of the row. Way more effective than that is once we get this information and we apply it to our lives, we then share it with our friends and our family. And that's the whole purpose behind our Anytime is a Good Time to Talk About Emergency Preparedness videos that you can see Be Ready Utah has been making. We're encouraging all of you to share this information, do it, and then share it with your friends and family. Say, hey, look at this cool thing that I did, because I found out that this is something I can do that's really easy, and it can help me be way more prepared for an emergency. So encourage you to do that same thing as well. And with that being said, we're going to start off with this little video.
Hey, Ken.
Hey,
How was your weekend?
it was good. I mowed the lawn and watched the game. You?
I filled my emergency water storage containers with water. I found out if you're using city tap water, it's already treated and ready for long-term storage. You don't have to add anything to it.
Huh. I should do that.
So we are, again, encouraging you to prepare and then share that. That's what this is all about. Okay, so let's move on. We're talking about water storage. Why is water so important? I mean, we talk about, well, I've got 1,000 pounds of wheat in my basement. I'm ready for the zombies, right? But as Jeff told us before, we can last like 3 or 4 weeks without food. How long can we last without water? Only 3 to 4 days. So why is water so important? Why do we have to have it? It's because you're 60 to 70% water yourself. That's literally what you are made out of. You need it to live and for basic bodily functions. All right, so how much water do you need then? Ken, if we could bring up that poll real quick.
There it is.
All
Go
right.
ahead, start selecting one of the following. Less than 4. Go ahead, Brian, you explain.
Okay, well, how much water do you have stored right now? Do you have less than 14 gallons, between 14 to 55 gallons, between 101 to 200 gallons? Or are you like ultra super prepper and you've got 101, or how much do you have? There's a bunch of options there, 5 options.
And we've got
Oh,
about
looks like we're,
50%
go
that have
ahead.
voted. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll close the poll and share results. Do you see that?
Okay. Yeah, it looks like most people have between 14 to 55 gallons. Well, that's really good. Well, let's talk about how much do we need. As we learned, if you were here yesterday, our friends from the Army Corps of Engineers said that the average American uses between 67.5 gallons of water a day. And I found that sometimes if you factor in things like taking a bath, watering the lawn, washing your car, these kinds of things, you can use like 116 to 220 gallons of water a day. Now, are you going to be able to store that much water just for drinking? No. Where does that most of that water go? It just goes down the drain. So how much do you really need to survive? If you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So how do you know if you're getting enough water? Not to get crass, but the best indicator to know if you are properly hydrated is your urine. If your urine is clear and it's plentiful and you're going often, then you're probably hydrated. If there's color or you're not going very often, then you are dehydrated. So think about that. Oftentimes we're not drinking, even in the best of times, not drinking enough water for proper health and hydration. So it's recommended to have a minimum stored of 1 gallon per person per day. That's a half a gallon for drinking, a half a gallon for food preparation, and for sanitation. Now keep in mind, this is a minimum. I don't know if you've ever really tried to live on only 1 gallon of water a day. I tried that once. It's really, really hard to conserve down to only 1 gallon. So, you know, once it's okay for just drinking, but when you start to smell bad and you want to take a bath, or you want to clean yourself off, or maybe wash off some dishes or some laundry, your water goes very fast. So you want to think about, if you live in a higher altitude, like here in Utah, or if you're in a dry climate, like here in Utah, you need to have more water. You'll need to drink more, and you'll just need to have more for drinking. You'll need to have more for children. Oh, sorry, just a second. You need to have more for children. If you're elderly, sick, nursing mothers need to have more, and maybe those that are physically exerting themselves. If you're out cutting trees, shoveling debris, you're going to need to drink a lot more water. So you want to store a minimum 2-week supply. How much is that for one person? So 2 weeks of water, if you're talking a minimum of 1 gallon. I wasn't a math major, but it comes out to 14 gallons per person. What if you have a family of 4? A minimum 2-week supply for a family of 4 comes out to 56 gallons, if you can do the math. So if you're thinking about like one of those 55-gallon standard water barrels, that's approximately what you need for a family of 4 to last 2 weeks. You're still a little shy, but again, bare bones minimum. I recommend having at least a month or more. I would say the most water that you can store that's within your budget, within reason for the space that you have for storage, store that much. Okay, there's a few things that negatively affect your water storage. Things like ultraviolet light, temperature extremes, and contamination. Let's talk about first one, sunlight. How does sunlight affect your water storage? Well, it breaks down the integrity of some of your water containers. I mean, plastic, after a while in the sunlight, even these blue, the standard blue water storage containers, if you have them sitting outside in direct sunlight, after about 4 or 5 years, they become brittle and just fall apart. Maybe even less than that. Yep, within 5 years. It also causes algae to grow. Sunlight. So you want to limit that sunlight as much as possible in your water storage areas. If you have algae growing in your water, it's not going to necessarily kill you. I mean, algae's, well, I guess except for the algae that we have growing in Utah Lake and some other places. But usually the kind of algae that would be in your water, it's not toxic, but it's not really fun to chew your water before you drink it. So you probably don't want that happening. Other things that can affect your water, temperature extremes. Now, I'm not talking about just cold or just hot, but usually the vacillating back and forth between the two. So how does that affect? Well, again, it promotes bacteria and algae growth, just like the sunlight. Warm storage temperatures can promote that bacteria and cause it to grow. It also loosens the seals or breaks the containers. Those cycles of freezing and thawing, it loosens those seals. And then once the seal is loosened, you've got evaporation. So you want to limit the extremes in temperatures in your storage areas as much as possible. What about contamination? That can come from a lot of different places. It can come from your water being unclean in the first place. If you're not using municipal water, like from a well or from a lake or something like that, then your water, of course, is unclean. It needs to be treated before you store it. Non-municipal sources, like I said, lake streams. But generally speaking, municipal water is safe and ready for long-term water storage. There was a question earlier in the day. Somebody asked about, do we need to add anything to the water? Not if it's municipal water. Sometimes we might have contamination from unclean containers. Maybe you went to the classifieds or a garage sale and you got yourself a water storage container and you thought, well, let's just fill this puppy right up. Make sure that container's clean before you do it. Maybe you might get a container from like a restaurant or something like that. Make sure that they're completely clean before you fill them up with your drinking water. Some other things you want to think about: don't use containers that are not food grade or had other things that were not food in them. Don't use them for storage. What about unclean practices when you're feeling? Maybe your water's clean and your container's clean, but if your hands are not clean, or if the hose you're using is not clean, that's going to introduce contaminants into your water as well. So make sure when you're filling your water, you're using clean water, clean containers, and clean practices when you're filling it. What can your water be contaminated with? Oh, all sorts of fun stuff. Now, there's the organisms, protozoa, they're kind of larger organisms, bacteria, a lot smaller, and then the really, really tiny stuff, the viruses. You might have chemicals in your water. Flood water is really bad for chemicals. Heavy metals might be dissolved in your water, maybe even sediments if it's churned up water. So you want to treat it before you store the water. Well, can't you just treat it when you need to use it? You could, but you don't really know the situation of when you may be needing to use that water. So it's best to store it clean and ready to use. So let's talk about water storage containers. There's a lot of different things people use to store water. Some of them are better than others. Some of them you shouldn't use at all. A lot of ones we think about just commercially bottled water. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I've found for myself that I used to not be a big proponent of the commercially bottled water, because it's not necessarily the best for your storage space. It takes up a lot more room. But we had where I live, we had a boil water order a while ago, and it wasn't the easiest thing to start just using out of my big water storage container. So since then, I've decided to have a storage of these small commercially bottled waters as well, just for convenience. Downsize is they only have about a 2 to 3 year shelf life. So it's not the water that goes bad, but it's the bottle. They're designed to break down after a number of years. So make sure that you rotate yours. I mean, we use ours all the time when we go camping or something like that. So we easily go through many cases every year of these. Just make sure you rotate them. Like I said before, the storage space, it's not as effective as larger containers for efficient use of space. It tends to be a little more expensive than just what you get right out of the tap. And something to think about, oftentimes bottled water really is just bottled water from somebody else's tap. Another thing, it's not always as clean as your tap water. The FDA is the one that holds bottled water. The FDA holds bottled water to a lower standard than the EPA does for municipal tap water. So consider that also when you're storing water. Now, what about pre-used containers? We talked a little bit about that. If you use these, you want to make sure that you thoroughly wash it. You can use a mixture of a ratio of about 1 teaspoon of unscented, non-colored sodium hypochlorite bleach, just standard bleach. So 1 teaspoon of that to a quart of water, that's a ratio. This is a cleaning solution. This is not a drinking solution. That would kill you. But you can use that to disinfect the inside of your water containers. Some people, they like to use warm soapy water to get rid of any residual things that may be inside of the containers. I found it sometimes hard to get the soap out, but as long as you rinse it really good, then you can use soap as well. Just get it all out because you don't want to have soapy tasting water. Make sure that you're getting rid of all of the food side of a pre-used containers. You know, if you've got sugars in there, then that promotes bacterial growth, something you're trying to not have. There might be tastes or odors, especially if you're using something like vinegar. Or I heard of one guy, he said that he got a big barrel that had pickles in it before. And he said, it's great, it's clean, it's food grade. Problem is my water always tastes like pickles. If you like pickles, that's great. But if you don't like pickles, I would recommend doing something else. Do not use containers which held chemicals. I said this before, but anything that had hazardous substances, you will never, ever be able to make it clean enough that it's safe to use. Now, Catherine McMullen was telling me that she likes to store in her empty laundry soap. She likes to fill that up and use it specifically as cleaning water, as wash water, and that's perfectly fine. Just make sure it's completely labeled as such. Make sure it's labeled as do not drink, wash water only. One thing to consider, if you're limited on space, only store water that's for drinking. So don't use containers which held chemicals. Let's talk a little bit about plastic containers. Plastic containers, they're pretty standard for water storage, easy to find and affordable. I know that it's a lot of times when there's the case lot sales, you can find them at grocery stores, you can find them in emergency preparedness stores, you can find them at any of your larger box stores. They're lightweight, they're durable. I mean, if you one of those huge 250-gallon tanks, when it's empty, it's about 80 pounds. It's kind of hard, but one person can move them around. When it's full, now it's over 2,000 pounds. So it's nice when it's easy to move when it's empty. So that's what I like about plastic. Some other things you want to think about with these. They come in a lot of different colors. Like you've got the white, you've got the blue, you've got the gray. Some people like to have blue ones because that readily identifies it as this is water. This is drinking water. Now I also know some people, if they store them in their garage, maybe they like to have the gray one because maybe they don't want everybody in the neighborhood to know that they have a large store of drinking water. So maybe they want to have it in a different color. If you use plastic, make sure that you have a high density polyethylene plastic with the number 2 in the triangle. This number 2. There are other plastics like one plastic that's for drinking water. That's what the commercially available little bottles of water are. Those are ones, and they're perfectly fine, but they're not designed for long-term water storage. Do not use milk jugs. They break down quickly. They become brittle. I've talked to a lot of people that use them because they're cheap. They have a lot of them, but about a year or two into their water storage, they went down to check their water storage and found out all of the containers were empty because they cracked and all the water came out. So you either have a water mess or you don't have any water. Plus the milk residual sugars and fats that are left behind, it's really hard to get out. So don't use milk jugs. Some people ask about glass containers. In fact, we had a question a little bit earlier in the day about using glass containers. Nice thing about glass, it's not as permeable as plastic. Plastic is semi-permeable, just meaning the air can pass through the wall of the container, whereas that won't happen with glass. There's no taste or odor that you get from the glass. But of course, what's the concern that we have with glass? Possible breakage. So I have an aunt-in-law, if there's such a thing, an aunt-in-law that she fills up when she's done with a bottle from her canning. She fills it up with water and puts it down in the basement. That's fine. Make sure you store it on a bottom shelf. So, in the event of an earthquake, you don't want heavy things falling and shattering. But don't have this as your sole source of stored water. It's okay to store water in there, but again, don't use that as your sole source of water. So yeah, glass is not recommended. What about metal containers? If you use a metal container, make sure you use stainless steel. A good thing about metal is you can boil your water in it. You want to be careful with that though, because some metal water bottles, they have an inner plastic lining, and you don't want to boil those. Some of them can be expensive. Some of them, they can leave behind a metal taste in your water. There's a possibility of rust. It's heavier, so don't really recommend the metal ones either. Your best ones for price and for everything else comes down to really the plastic ones are the ones we recommend. Filling considerations, there's some things you want to consider and plan for before you fill your water storage containers. Use a drinking water hose. This is one that I didn't do it at first. At worst, if you use a garden hose, you can add contaminants to your water. You don't want to use the hose that's been sitting out there that you've been watering your garden with, that's been sitting out there. UV light's been breaking it down over the years. It's starting to fall apart. I have to admit, I still drink out of the garden hose periodically, but you're not using that for long-term storage. At the least, your garden hose, even a brand new one, it could give a watery taste to the water. So I recommend you go to any Yeah, I've seen them at Walmart. I've seen them at any of those kinds of stores. They're really easy to find. RV stores have them. They're called drinking water hoses, culinary water hoses, RV hoses, boat hoses, any of those. Usually they're, I've only seen white ones, but that's what you want to use. You don't need to retreat you don't need to retreat municipal tap water. It's ready. It's already treated. It's ready for long time storage. A lot of times you can even smell the chemicals, the chlorine or other things that they use for treating the water. So you don't need to add more chemicals to it. You want to fill it all the way to the top, get out as much air as possible, and it keeps your gaskets moist as well. Okay, some storage considerations. Keep it cool, dark, and dry. Anything you're storing, whether it's water or it's food, batteries. We used to do film. If you remember, cameras used to have this thing called film. Cool, dark, and dry. Everything you store, cool, dark, and dry. Vary the container sizes. Like I said before, those 250-gallon tanks, these ones here, those are 2,000 pounds when they're full. That's great for storage space, but you're not moving it anywhere. These standard 55-gallon ones, they're over 450 pounds. Now, these 5-gallon ones, those are about 45 pounds when they're full. That's something you can carry with you if you need to evacuate. So they both, I say, have big and small. Don't store it directly on the concrete. Concrete, when it's in contact with something cold, you can have condensation, and that condensation, that moisture, you can have bacteria growth. So you want to keep everything dry underneath, just separating it. Make sure that you've got plenty of, like I've got 2x4s underneath this 2,000-pound tank here. Make sure that you've got enough under there to support the weight, but you don't want to store directly on the concrete. Just keep it dry underneath. You might have spills or something like that. Let's talk about the locations. Don't keep all your eggs in one basket. Maybe you have some in the basement. Maybe you have some in the garage. Maybe you have some underneath the bathroom sink. Have water in a few different places. I even know a guy that he stores full 2-liter bottles of water in his showers. And his line of reasoning is if there's an earthquake while he's in the shower and he's got soap in his eyes and in his hair and the water shuts off, he wants to be able to use that bottle of water to rinse himself off so he can get out. So multiple locations. Ideal places. Now, one thing I want you to think about, there's ideal, and then there's what we can do. Remember, something is always better than nothing. So when any of the things that you've been learning about today, a lot of times we're talking about the ideals, but always think, what can I do to get as close as possible to this ideal? So indoors, cool, dark, and dry, maybe a basement or food storage room. Okay would be in the garage or maybe a storage shed or under sinks. You might need to just check it every 6 months to a year. Make sure that you don't have any contamination going on. Make sure that you're keeping it away from possible chemical contaminants. I talked about plastic being semi-permeable. If you're storing it close to paint or gasoline or something like that, those fumes will pass through the wall of the container into your water. As a last resort, you may want to keep it outside. If you have absolutely no other places to store water, make sure that you're covering it with a heavy tarp. Try and maybe store it on the north side of the building so you have as little sunlight reaching it as possible. You don't want to fill it to the top in this case because you might need to have a little bit of room for expansion. And remember, don't store it directly on the ground. Okay, how often do you need to rotate it? Well, that kind of depends. FEMA and Red Cross say you need to rotate it every 6 months, but depending on how you store it and where you store it, what you store it in, you may not need to rotate it that often. If you keep it cool, dark, and dry in a clean, airtight, food-grade container, it could easily last 5 years or longer without rotation. I know the USU Extension, the USU Extension office says that if it's properly stored, you shouldn't ever have to rotate it. You do need to check it yearly and maybe every 6 months to a year for odd smells, discoloration, maybe some leaks. And be careful not to introduce contamination in if you're checking for contamination, and then replace it as necessary. Other sources of water, you might have more water in your home than you thought. House water pipes, you could have a few gallons in your house water pipes. If that's a possibility, say there's an earthquake, what you need to do is shut off the incoming water to your home. Don't turn it back on until you're told it's safe by the authorities, but shut off that incoming water. And then to get the water out of those pipes that's still clean drinking water, you can open the highest valve in the house, and then you dispense from the lowest valve in the house. Your water heater is a great source of water. Many of us probably have around 40 gallons of good drinking water there. Again, shut off the incoming water to your home. Shut off the gas or the power supply as per your manufacturer's directions. Allow the water to cool first. You don't want to have it coming out boiling hot, and then just dispense it. The tank behind the toilet. Can you use that water? You certainly don't want to use what's in the bowl. And you don't want to drink what's in the tank, but that could be used for cleaning purposes. So don't use that. Another one we don't think about, canned fruits and vegetables. We might be able to use the juice out of like pear slices there. Instead of using your drinking water to make that batch of bread, use that. If you're making like soup or something, use the juice from the green beans. So you're not using your valuable drinking water in food preparation. Maybe just for making your top ramen, use juice from your can of corn or your mushrooms. What about pools, hot tubs, and water beds? No, do not drink that water. Commercial filters, water filters, are not sufficient for making pools, hot tubs, and water beds suitable and safe for drinking. So what about other sources outside the home? You know, we've got lakes, rivers, streams, all these kinds of things, but you must treat the water before you drink it. I remember drinking some water as a kid when I was out hunting with my uncle one time, and it was okay. I didn't get too sick, but you never know what's upstream. So always treat that water that's outside. Other options, snow, ice, maybe even the stuff that's coming down the gutter. Remember that if it's coming off the top off of your roof, a lot of times the shingles have a lot of chemicals and stuff in them as well that you probably don't want to be drinking. Treat all of these sources of water before you ever think about drinking them. And snow and ice, just a thought with that, make sure that you warm them up before you drink them. That snow and ice can rapidly drop your core body temperature to dangerous levels if you just eat them like that. All right, some things you just want to stay away from. We're getting close to the end of time. Stay away from ditches, hot tubs, fish ponds, municipal fountains, waterways. They're all full of chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides. These are just too contaminated for commercially available treatments to effectively make it safe for drinking. So don't use those. So the rule of thumb, even if it looks clean, treat it. Don't just drink out of the stream. So let's really quickly rip through water treatment. We talked about how to store water, but what do you do if all your stored water is used up and you have to go to some of these outside sources? You want to think about these three methods of treating your water. And I really recommend, if you don't know what's in the water, using all 3 steps. Now, even the one before this, choose the cleanest source of water always whenever you are getting ready to use water. Okay, step 1, prefiltration. Get the chunks out. If you have a commercial water filter, get the chunks out first, because of course your water filter is going to be able to get those things out, but save the life of your filter for the micro stuff, the stuff you can't see. Get rid of the big stuff first. Okay, so things you can do, let the particles settle to the bottom or collect them with some kind of a siphon up at the top. You can filter them through a cloth. That's another way to get it out. You can see in the upper container here, there's still some sludge in there. But down here, even though the water's a little bit cloudy, you've gotten rid of the majority of the junk. The next step is a filtration. Filtration is a physical barrier that, as the water passes through it, it traps larger particles. There's all sorts of different kinds of filters. There's lots of different options, from gravity-fed ones like this one and this one and this one. These are large ones that maybe you have hanging from a tree, maybe you have on your kitchen countertop, to these smaller ones like this one and this one that are pump ones that are a great one for a family to have when you're out camping, or these smaller ones here like this or this that are great for individual disaster supply kits. What you can do, there's also water bottles that you fill it up with the questionable water and it filters through as you're drinking it. What I recommend doing is have a few different filters for different options. Talk to your local emergency preparedness retailer or outdoor supply store and see which ones will best work for you and for your budget. Different kinds of filters. Well, what about like my activated carbon filter, my activated carbon water filter? Those are okay. What they do is they actually absorb chemicals out of the water, maybe heavy metals, those kinds of things, which is a good thing. But by themselves, like your Brita or your Pure, or anything like that, by themselves, they're insufficient to filter out the microscopic organisms that could be contaminating outside sources of water. Most of the time, they're used to just make your water taste better. If you want to go ahead and do something like that, do it after you've done all your other filtration. But again, like I said, by itself, they're inadequate for removing microscopic organisms. The third step, purification. There's a couple of different ways of doing that. Heat purification, this is the easiest one. It doesn't remove anything from the water, but it kills anything that may be left over from the filtration process. This will kill viruses. Most of your filters will not filter out down to virus size, but boiling it after the fact will kill anything that's left. Well, why can't we just do boiling by itself? Well, boiling it, like I said, it doesn't remove anything from it. Filtering removes stuff, whereas boiling it just kills whatever's left. We don't have too much time to talk about it, but distilling is another way that you can do it. You can look up online how to make effective emergency stills. This is a really good way of heat purification for your water as well. Chemical purification, things like iodine. Iodine's what I used in Boy Scouts. The thing about that, it makes the water brown and it smells really bad. It works for viruses and some bacteria, but it's not effective against larger organisms like the larger multi-celled organisms. Okay, and plus, your average person can only use water that's been treated with iodine for about 30 days. It has about a 5-year shelf life. Oh, it doesn't kill protozoa. That's the word I was looking for. My mind went blank. If you have an allergy to iodine, or if you have a thyroid problem, or if you're pregnant, you don't want to use iodine at all. So iodine's kind of what we used to use, but there's a lot better things nowadays. Sodium hypochlorite, this is something that most people can use for chemical purification because we all tend to have just standard liquid bleach at home. If you're going to use that, make sure it's non-perfumed, non-colored. You only need to have about 8 drops, 8 drops per gallon. And you put that in there, you stir it up, and you wait for about 30 minutes for it to do its thing in killing what may be in the water. Wait for 30 minutes, and there should be a slight bleach smell. If there's not a slight bleach smell, put in 8 more drops. Do the same thing. Stir it up. Wait another 30 minutes. And if after a second treatment, if it still doesn't have a slight bleach smell, then you need to come up with another means of purification. Calcium hypochlorite dry bleach. This is not something we recommend. I know a lot of people say, oh, that's the way to go, but there's just so much. It does have a longer shelf life, but it's not recommended. You can talk to the manufacturer about how to use it, but many of them don't recommend using it at all. There's better ways of doing it anyway, better, safer ways. Chlorine dioxide. Now, this chlorine dioxide is something that's been around for a while, but has become a lot more popular with camping. There's liquid chlorine dioxide, and there's also the tablet form liquid chlorine dioxide. What you're actually doing with this is you're like hyper oxygenating the water, which kills all the things inside of it. A lot of municipalities even use chlorine dioxide in treating their municipal water. So you can look into that. That's the one that I have in my disaster supply kit to supplement my filters. So at the end of this, we have a to-do list. These are the things you want to think. What I took away from this. Put your ready to drink water in all your emergency kits. So you want to have water ready to go. But at the same time, you also want to have some water treatment supplies in all of your emergency kits as well. So when you use up your ready to go water, you still have a means of filling up and treating other water. Store as much water as possible and practical in different sizes of containers. Make sure that your water heater is secured in an earthquake or something like that. Not only do you not want that water heater to fall over and lose that potential 40 gallons of clean drinking water, but you don't want a gas leak and you don't want your house to blow up. Good to not have your house blow up. Practice water conservation. Think about, instead of doing a full luxurious bath, wasting all that potential drinking water, learn how to do a sponge bath, learn how to do dishes by hand, learn how to do laundry by hand. Have the supplies for doing that as well. Teach your household how and when to turn off the main water and other utilities. Make sure that you can turn them off and everybody knows how. Practice not using the plumbing for a weekend. Can you get by with only 1 gallon of water a day? Go camping. We're starting to get into colder weather, but when you go camping, that's a great way to practice all of your emergency preparedness skills that you've learned. And then, as we talked about before, remember, in a disaster, if you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of preparedness. So I would hope that we are all ready. Are you ready? And there's my contact information. So let's see. How do I stop showing screen? There we go. All righty. You're muted, Ken. Can't hear you.
I am. Thank you. Comprehensive presentation. We got a few questions here.
Sure.
So I'm going to go through these. Some of them you really did address, but how long to boil? That's a quick one. How long to boil?
Yes, how long to boil? Well, at sea level, you only need to boil for about 1 minute. But because here in Utah, we are at average elevation about 4,000 feet. We talk about in Utah, you need to have about a 3-minute boil. Now, if you go up higher than 4,000 feet, you'll need to go even longer than that. You're talking about 7,000 feet, you may need to get up into 10 minutes or longer. Oh, one thing I did neglect to say, if you go into the handouts, we do have a water storage and treatment brochure from Be Ready Utah that you can download and get a lot of this information, the specifics that are for Utah.
Good answer. There's an expiration date on water bottles. Is there an expiration date on water? How do you?
No, water does not have an expiration date. Usually those expirations are for the bottles themselves, not for
Very
the
good.
water. Now, like I
Okay.
said, for the commercial water bottle, you probably want to rotate those every 2 to 3 years. But if you're storing your own water, someplace cool, dark, and dry where it doesn't have direct contact from the sunlight, 5 years or maybe even longer if you're storing in ideal conditions for your own stored water,
Where do I
drinking
get
water.
straps to secure my water heater? How do I know if I've secured it?
You can get those water heater straps from most hardware stores. Some of your emergency supply stores will have them as well. So that's something you could do. Don't you just use that perforated plumber's tape? That's insufficient for the stresses that could be on your water heaters. Use
Okay.
commercial water heater straps.
Okay. Is it bad to store water in the same room as the furnace or the garage? You kind of mentioned the garage could be an opportunity. How about the furnace?
One thing you want to think about wherever you store it, cool, dark, and dry is ideal. But if the only place that you have is your furnace room maybe warm, that might be a consideration. You need to rotate it more often. I actually store mine in the room that I have my furnace. It's not a huge room, but it's a little bit bigger. One reason that I like that room is because I have a drain for the air conditioner in that room. So when I am thinking about I want to empty out my water containers, my water storage, I can just run a hose right to that drain. So that makes it a little easier. Plus, the same room as my water heater has an incoming cold to my water heater. And what I did is I put a tap in that incoming cold, a little faucet. So it makes it really easy to fill up my water storage containers in that room as well. So it's not bad, but just think about the storage conditions in that room. And you just may need to rotate or check your water more often depending on that.
Good answer. Is cardboard sufficient to go underneath smaller plastic water stored on concrete? So between the concrete and the water, is it okay just to have cardboard?
You don't want to have cardboard. And the same thing, you don't want to have like a sheet of plywood either. It's not just elevating it above, but it's allowing air to circulate underneath. So if you're doing something like that, get some 2x4s, maybe depending on the size of the container, 1x3s. You need that air needs to be able to flow freely underneath it. It's not just elevating it above for the sake of elevating it above, but air needs to flow underneath it to keep it dry underneath.
Is distilled water or seltzer water or mineral water a bad idea for emergency packs wondering about hydration issues?
Distilled water, it doesn't have any of the in any of the it's kind of your personal preference. Distilled water doesn't have any of the, what do you call it, the minerals or anything in it, so you're not getting any nutrition out of your water other than the water itself. It's not bad. It should be fine, but you want to think about how are you going to store that. I like the little packets of water because those have a 5-year shelf life. I store those, and I also store an empty hydration pack in my disaster supply kit. I have the packs that are stored water, good for 5 years, and I have the empty hydration pack that once those are gone, I can fill that hydration pack up with water and put in the chemicals and the filtration in that. So I hope that answered the question. Yeah, it's kind of
Good.
your personal if you like seltzer water, knock yourself out. There's nothing wrong with it.
Now we're going to go through a few more questions, but if we don't answer your question, be aware that we're going to try to respond to these by email. And so we've got your email information. And if we don't get your question answered here, we'll answer it otherwise. Please talk about storage and treatment of well water.
Thank you. Yes, that's something I had to zip through real quick in my presentation. Well water does need to be treated before you store it. It's not municipal water. It hasn't had all the chemicals and all the whatnot put in it. Well water does need to be treated before you store it.
Okay. I live near a
And you
stream.
can, I'm sorry, one other thing about that. What I talked about with the chemical treatments, fill up your tank, whatever you're going to be using, and you can use any of those chemical treatments for not the sodium hypochlorite, chlorine dioxide is a great one for using for treating your well water.
Good. I live near a stream, but there is a water reclamation plant upstream. Should I expect the stream to be contaminated in case of an earthquake?
Always expect outside sources of water to be contaminated.
Good.
Always expect them to be contaminated. You always want to treat, even in normal times, you want to treat that water if you're ever planning on drinking it.
I think you answered this one. Can you store water in a Clorox container?
Nope.
Okay.
Not unless you're only going to use it for cleaning. Do not
Okay.
ever use that for drinking. You can never get it clean enough for drinking water.
I heard that if the plastic water bottles expires, the plastic releases chemicals into the water, and the water in the containers are contaminated. Is that true? Haven't
Well,
heard that one.
there's different kinds of plastics. And the one that you again, for long-term storage, you want the high density polyethylene with the 2 in the triangle. That's long-term water storage. Now your other water bottles, they're still safe for drinking water. The ones has a 1 in the triangle. That's not intended for long-term storage. Different kinds of plastics. The problems with plastics is if you have them out in the sunlight or if they're heated, something like that, yes, they start to break down. But if you store it cool, dark, and dry, you're fine.
Okay, last question, and then we're going to probably have to close. What if you used culinary water connected to an outside faucet, but barrels were filled with a garden hose? What about contamination from the hose itself? And I think you may have answered that too.
Well, yeah, you're probably going to have contamination in there. Again, if you remember, I talked about there's ideal and then there's what we can do. Don't leave your water barrels or your water storage containers empty because you haven't gone and gotten the special drinking water hose. If nothing else, fill them up with the garden hose. That's better than nothing. And then treat that water. If there's ever any question as to the cleanliness, the usability of that water, treat it. Use the 3-part process that I talked about for treating that water if there's any question at all. Yes, if that's all you have, something is always better than nothing. Yes, please fill up those water containers.
Well, again, thank you, Bryan. I think we'll turn it back to our host now to close up things. And again, appreciate you and your efforts. Keep up the good work.
Appreciate you, Ken. You're the best. And you're all right too, Wade.
I'm all right too. Well, you're the best as well, Bryan. And I got to agree with you. Ken is the best too. We're all the best. Everyone's the best. Everybody here is the best. But a great presentation, Bryan. Thanks for hosting, Ken. We are at, let's see, 4:54, so about 6 minutes left. In wrapping it up today, again, I want to express thanks to everybody who has joined us today, everybody who has participated today, whether a viewer, attendee, or whether a presenter, a moderator. I've expressed thanks previously to Kathy Holder. I want to do so again for all of her support and effort in providing the platform and training and behind the scenes work there on our webinar. I also want to mention Michelle Lloyd, who's also been behind the scenes and helping to provide questions and answers, instructions for the moderators and our survey questions. Appreciate her support, as well as all the other people on our planning team that I probably don't have time to mention all by name, but I appreciate all of them. And in mentioning the surveys, I just want to let you know that you will all receive an exit survey as you leave the webinar. Please take a few moments to fill out I think it's a simple 2-question survey to let you know how we did in providing the information you were hoping to receive in our webinar today. There was some questions in our the question window about future webinars, and we do hope to provide these in the future, maybe on a little bit more regular basis. This is our first ever Be Ready Utah webinar, planned and conducted to replace the canceled Be Ready Utah Expo, our in-person event for preparedness, which was canceled due to COVID-19. And the status of the Be Ready Utah Expo in 2021 is probably still up in the air as well, as we wait to see what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic. So we will certainly try to bring more of these Be Ready Utah webinars to you, these virtual preparedness training sessions, and provide this potential life-saving information. Also, again, want to remind you and encourage you to check out the handouts section of your control panel. Make sure you got all those handouts. Also, go into the chat window or the question window, and you'll find again the links to our videos. These sessions have been recorded, and they will be uploaded to the Be Ready Utah channel on YouTube. That's youtube.com/user/BeReadyUtah, and encourage you to watch them again, share them with others, and just help spread the word. As you've seen here today, anytime is a good time to talk about emergency preparedness. Tell your friends and neighbors about what you've learned these last 2 days. Go take action. We encourage you to take some action on something that you've learned. What can you do now at home, at work, wherever, to make yourself and your family a little bit more better prepared for emergencies and disasters? This year of 2020, we've seen a lot of them. We know they can happen. So what can you go home and do now? Take some action to be better prepared, and talk to your neighbors about it and encourage them to do the same things. We are all responsible for our own safety.
Wade,
And yes.
could we please ask everyone if you wouldn't mind just commenting in the questions section if there's some kind of special webinar or information that you would like in future webinars? If you would put a note there, that would be really helpful. And anything that you will take away from this day, an action that you're going to do because of having attended, that would be great to add to if you feel like you'd like to. Thank you,
Marilyn. Yes, thank you, Marilyn, for bringing that up. And I think everybody that's here still heard that. So if you wouldn't mind, please taking a moment to just enter in future topics you'd like to hear about and what you're taking away from this webinar today and yesterday in the question window. It is 4:58. I think we'll let you go a minute or two early with these final words. Again, you've heard several times today and yesterday. In a disaster, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of preparedness. How low do you want to sink? We hope that's just a little bit of a motivation to help you take some action involving the things you've heard and learned about today. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you being here. We couldn't do this without you. And again, go to bereadyutah.gov for more information and brochures. And hopefully we'll have a lot of the brochures available that were here this weekend, tied to the videos on the YouTube channel. I think they will also have links to the handouts there at the YouTube channel, our Be Ready Utah YouTube channel. With that, everybody have a great evening. Thank you, and be safe.